I grew up in Monterey Park. I went to Repetto Elementary School and then Mark Keppel High. And I never fit in. But man, did I try. I even came up with the brilliant idea to join the hall monitors to make friends. It didn't work. Mostly because I was a militant hall monitor. I was the Genghis Khan of the hallways. It's a terrible way to make friends, by the way. When my older sister saw how terrible and desperate I was, she told me that when I joined her in high school, I should follow her lead. And so I did. She had me join the band, then the theater department, and finally, La Raza. It's an organization that celebrated Latin culture. I knew my parents would like this because they wanted me to be more in touch with my Guatemalan side. A little backstory. My family moved here from Guatemala when I was 2 years old. When I was 5, my mom noticed something. When she would call to me, I wouldn't respond. They would talk to me and my eyes would just glaze over. My parents feared the worst. They took me to a hearing specialist and he ran a lot of tests on me. After a while, he called my parents into his office and I remember him sitting behind his big black desk and he took off his glasses and he cleaned them. He said, "I know why you're having troubles with your son." I remember looking over at them and their face going white when they heard the doctor say that. And I remember very clearly when they reached over and grabbed each other's hands, bracing for the news. He took a breath and then he said, "Your son doesn't understand Spanish." He only speaks English. You need to speak English to him. My parents wanted me to be American and speak good. I mean, well. But because we moved here, when we moved here, my sister started going to school and was placed immediately in ESL. My folks had to take English classes actually at Mark Keppel, my high school. And I remember going with them and playing on the floor while teachers reviewed American idioms with them. My parents didn't want me to suffer the way they did. So they pushed me to be American and speak English. We didn't have money for your fancy American tutors, so they plopped me down in front of America's tutors, Big Bird and Mr. Rogers. And I acclimated a little too well for their liking. They wanted me to act Hispanic, but I was American. Like many immigrants, my parents moved to a city to be close to other Hispanic people. In the early 80s, Monterey Park was mostly Hispanic, but as I grew up, trying to fit in this city, it shifted from Hispanic populace to an Asian populace, and my parents' idea of cultural comfort in this city disappeared. The city didn't know who it was, which made going to a school that was also powering through growing pains very challenging. Having a mixed ethnic population was difficult for the teachers. I had one teacher, though, that would lament that the school was better off with just white children, like God intended. And she would tell us in class repeatedly. That casual racism never bothered me, but the air of a racial divide makes it hard to make friends because not a lot of kids had much in common with each other. I mean, sure, kids my age, growing up in the 80s, we watched the same cartoons and the TV shows because TV was really our only shared experience. But you have to remember, we wouldn't even say the same things when somebody sneezed. And I personally was stuck in a weird sort of limbo. I wasn't like any of the other kids. I mean, obviously I wasn't Chinese or Japanese or Korean, right? And the other Hispanic kids, they would call me a coconut because I was brown on the outside and white in the middle. I wasn't Hispanic enough to them, and I wasn't like the normal kids either because I liked Borscht Belt comedy. I got way too many references on the Golden Girls. Oh yeah, and I watched the Golden Girls. So I couldn't wait for high school. Things would have to be much better, right? Which leads me back to the group La Raza. We met during lunch and we would eat together. And by the time I got to high school, I hadn't really sat with anyone during lunch for years. And I normally opted to eat alone in the library because I hated how lonely it felt to sit at a big empty table built to hold 8 people. And as much as I didn't fit in with the La Raza kids, I stayed because being alone was hard. I mean, I wasn't really bullied in school. I was just invisible. And La Raza was happy to have me because of the color of my skin. As long as you were brown, you were welcome. When I was a sophomore, 2 things happened. One, one of my friends in La Raza got a girlfriend of Chinese descent. And then this guy named Raul joined the group. When my buddy got his girlfriend, she started coming to the meetings and offered to take notes. She would sit in the back next to my friend, just happy to be there, and she would help out. Raul did not think this was right. Raul thought the group was only for brown people, so he called a secret meeting. Raul wanted to kick out my friend's girlfriend. To my surprise, everyone else agreed. I was angry. I didn't see the big deal. She wasn't trying to change us or do anything. She just wanted to hang out with her boyfriend. She was nice and came out to support us at our events, but Raul wouldn't listen to reason. I left the group in a huff, vowing never to return. But because my sister was still part of the group and my parents wanted me to return to La Raza's loving embrace, I had to go to this fundraising dinner one night shortly after this debacle. At this dinner, all these people that decided not to stand up to Raul's preposterous, unmotivated divide were there enjoying a meal that my buddy's girlfriend had helped set up. If I was old enough to drink, I would have been drinking, but instead I just sort of stared at Raul, trying to decide what I was going to say to him. Then at one point toward the end of the night, Raul came to talk to me. In English, he told me how sorry he was that I left La Raza and that they would always welcome me back. Then he turned to some other member and in Spanish started to tell her that I was a traitor to all Hispanics and that he was making nice for my sister's sake, but deep down, I would always be a fat coconut. He laughed, but stopped when he realized that I knew what he said, because even though I couldn't speak Spanish, my parents were sure as shit to make sure I understood it. And Raul did not know this at all. He tried to backtrack in English, obviously, and apologized, but I raised my hand, I told him to stop. I told him I obviously understood what he said, and then I said things that I will not repeat because I am now a gentleman. I was not eloquent, I was just angry. And then I left to go wait for my parents in the parking lot of a Baker Square at night because my parents had already paid for the dinner and they didn't want to leave. La Raza was the first place that had welcomed me blindly, and it was a group of people that looked like me and accepted me, and it hurt to be separated, and I felt very betrayed, but I just couldn't be part of a group that only cared about what I looked like on the outside instead of who I was on the inside. Thank you.